Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop trying to grasp something, it often finds its way to you? As if the universe responds not to your effort, but to your energy. There's a quiet power in surrender. So quiet, most people miss it entirely. In the theater of human desire, we're taught to chase, to strive, to reach for what we want. But what if the real magnetism lies not in pursuit, but in presence? What if the more you try to control how others see you, the more invisible you become? True influence begins the moment you release your grip. The second you no longer need to be chosen, you become undeniable. This isn't about apathy. It's not about pretending not to care. It's about reclaiming your center, your essence, your wholeness. We've been conditioned to believe that love, success, and worth must be earned through performance. But here's the quiet truth. What is rooted doesn't beg for attention. What is grounded doesn't chase approval. And what is complete doesn't seek permission to be seen. This is the paradox that ancient minds like the Stoics understood so deeply. Control, they taught, is found in surrender. Power isn't built through resistance, but through alignment. When you stop striving to be chosen, you begin to radiate something unshakable: self-respect, calm, and truth. And in a world addicted to noise, that kind of stillness echoes the loudest. Why do we give so much of ourselves, so quickly, so desperately? Why do we stretch our energy thin, offering pieces of our soul in hopes that someone might see our worth? Many people don't realize they're not connecting, they're auditioning. Every compliment, every instant reply, every effort to please is often a silent cry. Please don't forget me. Please see that I matter. But in trying to be seen, they vanish, because true presence can't coexist with constant proving. At the root of this pattern is a hidden belief that love must be earned and value must be demonstrated. And so we try harder. We text first, we show up too soon, we say too much, hoping to fill the silence with evidence that we are enough. But every time we reach from emptiness, we confirm to ourselves that we're incomplete. The tragedy isn't in giving, it's in giving from a place of fear. When you need someone to validate your worth, you unknowingly place your identity in their hands. You allow them to shape your story, define your value, determine your belonging. But the truth is this: no amount of attention can fill the void left by self-abandonment. Approval that must be chased will never feel safe once caught. And when your energy becomes a performance, it loses its power. Freedom begins the moment you stop handing out pieces of yourself in exchange for recognition. It begins when you realize that being seen starts with seeing yourself and refusing to shrink just to be accepted. We've been told that effort equals value, that the more you try, the more you'll be loved. But attraction doesn't bloom in the soil of desperation. It grows in the quiet confidence of someone who already knows who they are. Real magnetism isn't loud. It doesn't beg for attention or scream to be noticed. It lingers in the subtle, calm presence of a person who doesn't need to prove anything. Someone whose energy says, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to be myself." People are not drawn to perfection. They're drawn to truth, to that rare feeling of being in the presence of someone who is at peace with themselves. The kind of person who walks into a room and doesn't need to ask, "Do you see me?" because their very presence already answers the question. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. It's the inner stillness that whispers louder than any performance ever could. Because when you carry yourself with quiet certainty, people feel it. Even if they can't explain why, they lean in. They want to know more. Not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you're not trying at all. That's the secret. It's not about chasing attention. It's about becoming the kind of person who no longer needs it to feel whole. In a world that glorifies constant movement, where proving, posting, and performing have become second nature, choosing stillness is an act of quiet rebellion. It takes courage to not rush in with words, to not fight for attention, to resist the urge to explain yourself when silence feels vulnerable. But stillness is not weakness. It is restraint in its most refined form. It is the refusal to beg for what your presence alone should command. Most people confuse stillness with indifference, but there's nothing passive about being rooted in your truth. It takes strength to not chase, to not react, to let things unfold without forcing them. Because when you stop reaching outward, you begin reaching inward, and that's where true clarity lives. Those who leave a lasting impression are rarely the loudest in the room. They're the ones whose energy lingers, whose absence feels heavier than most people's presence. Why? Because they don't scatter their attention. They don't dilute their value. They stay whole, even when the world tries to pull them apart. To be still is to trust. Trust that what's meant for you will recognize you, that your worth doesn't increase with volume, and that not everything deserves a response. The world may not teach us this kind of power, but once you taste it, you'll never trade it for noise again. There is a kind of power that doesn't need to raise its voice. It doesn't demand, it doesn't chase. It simply holds. And in that holding, something remarkable happens. The world begins to lean in. Silence, when rooted in self-awareness, becomes a language more persuasive than any speech. It signals that you are not here to be approved. You are here to be aligned. And that distinction changes everything. Most people give their energy away too easily, explaining themselves to those who never asked, justifying their worth to those who never valued it. But when you begin to live by your own standards, your silence becomes intentional. Not as a wall, but as a filter. Not as punishment, but as protection. You stop offering your presence like a bargain. You start offering it like a gift, one that must be earned, not expected. Because your time, your energy, your spirit, they are sacred. And those who truly see you won't need to be convinced to treat them that way. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It moves quietly, anchored in self-respect. It lets go of trying to be understood by everyone, and instead chooses to be deeply understood by a few. It doesn't fear walking away when something feels misaligned. It trusts that what is lost in noise is gained in clarity. And so you remain calm. You remain grounded. Not because you lack emotion, but because your peace has become non-negotiable. There comes a point in your journey where you no longer ask, "Do they see me?" Instead, you begin to ask, "Do I recognize myself in the life I'm living?" This is the shift, when you stop molding your identity to fit the expectations of others and begin shaping your world around the truth of who you are. It's the quiet turning point where validation loses its grip and self-definition takes its rightful place. Because no amount of praise can substitute for the peace that comes from knowing you are living in alignment with your essence. And no amount of external recognition can fill the emptiness left by self-neglect. The truth is, every time you adjust your voice, your values, or your vision to be more palatable, you trade authenticity for approval. You become more liked, perhaps, but less you. And in that space, connection becomes hollow. But when you define yourself, when you choose your own standard and stand firmly in it, something powerful happens. The noise around you fades, the opinions lose their weight, and the people who remain are the ones who see you as you are, not as you've performed to be. This isn't about shutting the world out. It's about no longer letting the world write your story. You take back the pen, you choose the tone, the rhythm, the truth. And the more you live in that truth, the less you seek approval, because you've already given yourself permission to belong. There is something undeniably magnetic about a person who doesn't rush to be understood. They don't overshare. They don't explain every layer of who they are in hopes of being accepted. They don't fill every silence with words just to prove they belong. Instead, they leave space. Space for curiosity, for intrigue, for others to feel before they try to define. This isn't manipulation. It's not a performance of distance. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows they don't need to be fully unraveled in the first 5 minutes to be real. They trust that their presence, their energy, carries a weight that cannot be replicated, and that the right people will sense it. Mystery, when authentic, isn't built on secrecy. It's built on wholeness. It comes from not needing every part of yourself to be instantly known. Because you're not looking for approval, you're simply living in alignment. In a world addicted to instant gratification, there's power in holding something back. In letting others earn your truth, layer by layer, moment by moment, not to tease, but to protect the sacred. Because not everything meaningful should be handed over freely. When you know your worth, you become more selective with your presence. And that selectivity, that intentional reserve, is what makes people lean in. Not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you've become whole enough to no longer chase connection. You invite it. And in that stillness, in that space where you don't explain, don't rush, don't strive, you create gravity. The kind that doesn't shout but pulls. The kind that doesn't demand but captivates. There is a rare kind of presence that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. It doesn't compete for space. It doesn't rush to respond. It simply is grounded, steady, unwavering. But don't mistake that calm for ease. It's not something you stumble into. It's a discipline, an inner architecture built through self-respect, clarity, and restraint. In a world that idolizes instant reactions and quick replies, choosing stillness is an act of maturity. When others panic, you breathe. When others speak just to fill silence, you pause with intention. When others seek attention, you stay rooted in your own rhythm. And people feel that difference. Because calm presence doesn't beg to be noticed, it commands attention through contrast. In the chaos of constant noise, your quiet becomes magnetic. Your restraint becomes rare. Your ability to hold your energy, not scatter it, creates a gravitational field that draws in what's real and repels what's shallow. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's knowing that your energy is not up for negotiation, that not every impulse deserves a reaction, that some spaces are better met with observation than with explanation. And over time, people begin to treat you differently, not because you demanded respect, but because your presence taught them how to offer it. You don't chase conversations, you don't perform your worth, you don't prove your place. You simply carry yourself like someone who knows they belong, and that, in itself, is power. True detachment isn't born from apathy. It's born from reverence for yourself, for your peace, for the sacred space of mutual connection. Letting go isn't an act of coldness, it's an act of clarity. It's what happens when you realize that staying in the wrong energy costs more than walking away ever could. Most people confuse detachment with distance. But the kind of detachment that holds power is not about creating walls. It's about honoring boundaries. It's the understanding that your presence is not a currency to be spent in places where it isn't valued. It's a gift, and gifts are not thrown at the feet of indifference. You don't detach to punish. You detach to protect. You step back, not because you don't care, but because you care enough about your own spirit to stop shrinking it to fit places too small for your truth. There's a quiet nobility in saying, this isn't for me, and that's okay. No anger, no explanation, just self-respect wrapped in stillness. And what's remarkable is this. When you detach from needing someone to choose you, you become the clearest version of yourself. You start to move from a place of alignment instead of anxiety. And the people who are meant for you, they'll recognize that. Not because you tried to convince them, but because your energy no longer asks for permission to exist. Detachment, when rooted in love for oneself, becomes a silent mirror. It reflects truth, it reveals depth, and it invites only what is willing to meet you where you already are. In a world that thrives on craving, on chasing, proving, and pleasing, there is something almost revolutionary about a person who feels complete without applause. Wholeness, the kind that doesn't need a spotlight to feel seen, is rare. And because it's rare, it's powerful. Not in a loud or performative way, but in the quiet way that shifts the energy of a room without saying a word. When you're grounded in yourself, you stop broadcasting your value, you embody it. You no longer reach out with questions like, am I enough? Instead, your life begins to answer for you through the way you speak, the way you move, the boundaries you uphold. This kind of power can't be faked. It's not a mask. It's not a pose. It's what remains when you no longer build your worth on shifting foundations. It's what grows when you've stopped trying to be everything for everyone and have finally returned home to yourself. And the world feels that shift. People sense it, not as arrogance, but as sovereignty. You're not trying to be chosen anymore. You're not living in reaction. You're living in rhythm, with your values, your vision, your peace. Those who resonate with your energy will come closer, not because you reached for them, but because your stillness gave them space to recognize something real. And those who don't, they fade without resistance, without regret. Because when you're whole, you're no longer afraid of who leaves. You're only interested in who sees you clearly without needing you to shrink. That is the essence of rare power, a quiet, grounded truth that says, I'm already enough, with or without your yes. There's a sacred turning point in every soul's journey. A quiet moment when you stop asking, what do I need to do for them to see my worth? And instead begin asking, Why did I ever think I had to earn it? This is the death of performance and the birth of presence. So many of us spend years auditioning for spaces that were never meant to hold us. We contort ourselves into versions we think are more lovable, more likable, more accepted, believing that if we just give enough, prove enough, shine enough, we'll finally be chosen. But here's the truth no one tells you. The need to prove is rooted in the fear of being unseen. And when you release that fear, not by numbing it, but by meeting it with compassion, you reclaim something you never actually lost, your wholeness. You stop performing and start being. You stop bending yourself for validation and start walking in alignment with your own truth. You no longer enter rooms hoping to be picked. You arrive knowing that your presence is the invitation. You don't chase connection, you allow it. And if it doesn't come, you don't collapse. Because your peace is not held hostage by other people's recognition. And that shift, it changes everything. When you're no longer trying to prove, your energy becomes clean, calm, and centered. People feel that. They may not be able to name it, but they recognize something rare. Someone who is no longer trying to fit in, but instead belongs to themselves. That's the kind of presence that can't be ignored. Not because it's loud, but because it's true. We live in a world addicted to noise. Verbal noise, digital noise, emotional noise. Everyone is saying something. Everyone is trying to be heard. But in the middle of all that sound, the rarest thing isn't volume. It's silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of depth. The stillness of someone who doesn't need to speak to be felt. The presence of a soul so rooted in itself, it doesn't clamor for attention, it attracts it. This kind of stillness is not passive, it's intentional. It's the kind of quiet that comes from knowing you have nothing to prove and nothing to chase. You're not reacting to be validated. You're not performing to be accepted. You're simply being. And in that being, you create a resonance more powerful than any words. Because when you stop speaking just to fill the space, your words begin to matter more. When you're not constantly available, your presence becomes more meaningful. When you no longer try to be everywhere, you become unforgettable exactly where you are. Stillness is presence refined. It is energy unscattered. It is clarity that no longer needs noise to feel significant. And those who are attuned will notice. They'll feel your energy long before they understand it. They'll remember how calm you made them feel, even if they never fully grasp why. In a world full of echoes, be the one who carries the weight of silence. Because silence, when anchored in truth, is not emptiness, it is power, wrapped in peace. At the end of it all, the question isn't, did they choose me? The real question is, did I stay true to myself, even when no one was watching? Because that is where your power lives. Not in the moments when you're validated, but in the moments when you're alone with your truth and still know you're enough. This journey isn't about becoming untouchable. It's not about turning cold or distant. It's about rising into a version of yourself so rooted, so self-honoring that you no longer betray your peace just to be seen. You no longer offer your energy in exchange for attention. You offer it as a reflection of your alignment. There is a rare kind of beauty in someone who doesn't reach, but radiates, who doesn't perform, but embodies, who doesn't wait to be chosen, but walks with the quiet certainty of someone who has already chosen themselves. If this path speaks to you, this path of clarity, presence, stillness, and quiet strength, know that you're not walking it alone. There is a deeper rhythm to life, one that rewards patience over panic, self-trust over self-doubt, and being over proving. So as you move forward, ask not how to get more attention, but how to build a life so full, so grounded that attention becomes irrelevant. Let your presence be your message. Let your stillness be your echo. And if these words have stirred something in you, something you've always known but never fully claimed, then stay with this journey. Let it keep unfolding. There's more waiting. Until then, stay steady, stay true, and remember, when you no longer need to be chosen, you become the one who is never forgotten. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to chase to be seen, because the kind of presence that leaves a mark, the kind that lingers long after the room is empty, is never built on noise. It's born from truth. The quietest people are often the ones who carry the heaviest gravity, not because they demand your attention, but because they don't. They've done the inner work. They've met their shadows, claimed their peace, and chosen themselves long before anyone else had the chance. And that kind of energy, it speaks without words, it draws without effort, it echoes without volume. When you no longer search for validation, you become the one who validates. When you no longer fear the silence, you become the voice others lean in to hear. And when your wholeness is no longer up for debate, your presence becomes undeniable. So the next time you find yourself wondering whether they noticed, whether you did enough, whether you mattered, pause. And ask instead, did I remain in integrity with who I am? Did I protect my peace? Did I offer myself with honesty, not with need? Because in the end, it's not about being everywhere. It's about being real, so grounded, so unwavering, that even in your stillness, you become unforgettable. The world will always chase the loudest voice, but the soul, it listens for what's true. And truth always leaves the loudest echo.